when Charlotte Sterling, a wealthy and influential donor, mocked Amara Johnson as just another staff member at a prestigious wildlife charity event. She had no idea who she was insulting. What started as a dismissive comment quickly spiraled into a shocking revelation that would change the entire room's perception. Amara, the quiet, humble leader of Wild Horizons, wasn't just an attendee. She was the founder, and her work had already saved countless endangered species. But when Charlotte realized the truth, the damage was already done. How will Charlotte handle the fallout from her arrogance? And will Amara forgive her? Find out how a single moment of judgment can alter lives and reveal the true power of humility. Welcome to Stories of the Heart, where real stories that touch your soul unfold. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts on the story. Amara Johnson had always been a woman of quiet determination. Born into a family that valued hard work and service to others, she had grown up with a deep respect for nature and the creatures that called it home. With a heart committed to the preservation of the world's endangered species, Amara had founded Wild Horizons, a conservation organization dedicated to saving animals on the brink of extinction. Amara's vision was clear: to create a sanctuary where these animals could thrive far from the threat of poaching, habitat destruction, and environmental degradation. Wild Horizons was a beacon of hope for many species, but it was also a labor of love, one that required not only financial support, but also relentless dedication. Amara was determined to ensure that future generations would know and respect the incredible diversity of wildlife that once roamed freely. The evening of the charity gala at the Verdant Wild Sanctuary was meant to be a celebration of their hard work. The event, held to raise funds for the ongoing projects at the sanctuary, attracted some of the wealthiest and most influential figures in the country. The expansive grounds of the sanctuary were adorned with soft lighting, creating a magical atmosphere as guests mingled under the stars. The air was filled with the soft hum of conversations, punctuated by occasional laughter, as champagne flutes clinked in the distance. Amara had been a pivotal force behind this event. She had worked tirelessly to organize it, hoping to raise enough funds to secure a future for the rare species under her care. Despite her significant role, she found herself seated at a table away from the spotlight. She wasn't the type to draw attention to herself. Dressed in a simple yet elegant black dress, Amara blended into the background, quietly observing the guests as they moved about the venue. She took comfort in the anonymity, preferring to focus on the cause rather than the accolades. The atmosphere was filled with opulence, expensive suits, flowing gowns, and the faint scent of luxury that seemed to linger in the air. People gathered in small groups, their laughter resonating in the pristine space as they discussed everything from the latest corporate trends to personal anecdotes. Among the guests was Charlotte Sterling, a highly influential donor who had made significant contributions to various causes in the past. Charlotte, a woman in her mid-40s, was known for her sharp wit, commanding presence, and the wealth she flaunted without hesitation. She was a woman accustomed to being the center of attention, and tonight was no exception. As the evening wore on, Charlotte's gaze fell upon Amara. Amara sat quietly at her table, not speaking to anyone. Her eyes focused on the papers in front of her. It wasn't the first time Charlotte had noticed someone like Amara at one of these events. But tonight, something about the woman's posture, her stillness, caught her eye. To Charlotte, it seemed odd for someone attending such an exclusive event to be so unobtrusive. Her curiosity piqued. Charlotte glanced over at her companion, a fellow donor, and whispered loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Isn't it strange there's a woman sitting all alone over there looking like she's part of the staff? Why would someone like her be here?" She chuckled, the sound dripping with condescension. Her companion, a man who often enjoyed the privilege of her company, nodded in agreement, offering an amused smile. "Probably a protester or someone from the behind the scenes team," he replied with a shrug. "It's hard to believe anyone so unkempt would be here for any other reason." Charlotte, who had grown accustomed to a world where people noticed her, felt a sense of superiority wash over her. She wasn't used to being ignored. In her mind, the gala was for people like her, those who had the power, the influence, and the wealth to make a real difference. As she sipped her champagne, her eyes lingered on Amara, who remained absorbed in her work, seemingly unaware of the whispers that swirled around her. In that moment, Charlotte's arrogance was palpable. She was one of the event's most important donors, and she believed her presence here had earned her the right to pass judgment on others. The fact that Amara, sitting alone at her table, remained so composed and quiet irritated her in ways she couldn't quite explain. "Why is she being served at all?" Charlotte muttered under her breath, loud enough for the nearby waitstaff to hear as they walked by. "Doesn't she know this is a VIP section?" Her sharp words sliced through the air as she watched Amara, still unaware of her surroundings, quietly accepting a glass of water. One of the waiters, a young man, stiffened at the remark, but kept his expression neutral. "She's on the guest list, ma'am. I believe she's part of the team here tonight." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "On the guest list," she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "This is a donors' event, not some backwater charity drive. Are we really letting people like her into the fold now?" She couldn't help but feel a pang of disdain for the woman who had dared to sit in a space she considered to be her own domain. She continued to watch Amara, now beginning to grow even more uncomfortable. There was something about the way Amara didn't react to the world around her. Something about her calm presence that struck a nerve deep within Charlotte in her mind. People who were important like herself didn't just fade into the background. They commanded attention. They were admired and they were listened to. Charlotte's next move was calculated. She would make it clear to both Amara and the rest of the room that she was the one in control. The night was still young, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly since Amara's quiet, unnoticed arrival. Guests in their tailored suits and glamorous dresses moved around, creating an undercurrent of conversation filled with laughter and superficial politeness. Yet, as the evening wore on, the buzz of excitement seemed to fade into the background for Amara, who remained seated in her quiet corner, her focus steadfast on her work. The event was meant to be a celebration of all the progress Wild Horizons had made. Yet, Amara was rarely the center of attention. This was no surprise to her. She had always preferred to stay in the background, allowing her work to speak for itself. But tonight, the sight of guests swirling in a bubble of luxury made her feel further removed from her own vision, the pure, undistracted focus on preserving life rather than flaunting it. Amara continued to sift through the papers in front of her, the soft rustle of the documents barely audible over the clinking of champagne glasses. She was reviewing proposals for the next phase of the sanctuary's expansion, the blueprint for an endangered species recovery unit that could save countless lives. As her pen sketched through the lines, She was lost in the vision of what could be achieved with a bit more funding and dedication. However, her concentration was broken when Charlotte Sterling made her way across the room again, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She stopped in front of Amara's table, her eyes narrowing slightly at the side of the woman still hunched over her work. "Still here." "Ha." Charlotte's voice was sharp, loud enough for a few nearby guests to overhear. "You must be doing something important, huh?" There was a deliberate bite to her words, laced with an undercurrent of mockery. "A project manager or something, perhaps." Amara looked up briefly, her expression calm, but her heart sinking as she recognized the continued disrespect. Charlotte, with her high-status persona, had yet to realize that the person she was belittling was the very reason the event existed in the first place. With quiet grace, Amara simply nodded, returning her gaze to the papers in front of her. She chose not to dignify Charlotte's words with a response. After all, she was there to do what mattered, not to engage in petty exchanges. Charlotte, however, wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly, her posture one of feigned concern, but laced with disdain. "You know, if you're going to hang around here," Charlotte continued, her words slow and deliberate, "maybe you should start acting like you belong. This is a donors event, not a charity dinner. People like me are the ones who make these things possible." She paused, giving Amara a look that was intended to be condescending. "I don't know what you're doing here, but you could at least make an effort to blend in." Amara held her ground, her hands still steady as she adjusted the papers. She let the comment roll off her like water off a duck's back, understanding that this was not about her, but about Charlotte's desperate need for validation. Yet, as much as the words stung, Amara refused to react in a way that would fuel the confrontation. The guests nearby, who overheard Charlotte's remarks, exchanged glances, some clearly uncomfortable with the blatant disrespect, but no one spoke up. No one dared to interrupt the flow of the evening's upper-crust performances, where wealth and influence spoke louder than dignity and respect. Amara remained silent, choosing to keep her focus where it belonged. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone, least of all someone like Charlotte Sterling, whose perception of worth was measured solely by her wealth and status. Charlotte, noticing that Amara was not going to give her the satisfaction of a retort, turned away with a slight scoff, rejoining her circle of influential donors. But as she walked away, her gaze lingered for just a moment on the papers in front of Amara. The papers that held the future of so many creatures, the future of life that depended on a silent commitment that Charlotte would never understand. As the evening went on, Amara's quiet resolve became more apparent to those around her. She remained in her corner, not for lack of being seen, but because she knew that the work she was doing was far more important than the temporary accolades of a well-dressed crowd. While Charlotte and the other guests flitted from one conversation to another, Amara's mind was with the animals at Wild Horizons. The ones whose lives were being saved, whose habitats were being restored. But the evening's sting would not go unnoticed for long. Though it was clear that Charlotte would not recognize the depth of Amara's mission. The quiet dignity with which Amara carried herself would make an even louder statement. As the night wore on, Amara noticed the boy again, the young child who had earlier pointed at her, and asked his mother about the whale figurine she was sketching. Now the boy's curious eyes seemed to study her from across the room, still filled with admiration, innocence, and a sense of wonder. Amara smiled faintly, grateful that even in a room full of indifference, there were still those who saw beyond the surface. With that thought, she went back to her work, never once glancing up as Charlotte and her companions continued to bask in their own self-importance. As the evening continued, the opulent ballroom of the verdant wild sanctuary filled with the low hum of conversations and the soft clinking of glass. Guests moved around the room, exchanging pleasantries and business cards, all the while oblivious to the quiet, focused figure seated at the far corner. Amara Johnson, as usual, wasn't seeking attention. Her mind was still on the animals at Wild Horizons, the sanctuary she had worked so tirelessly to create. Her purpose was clear, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone divert her from that mission. However, the quiet of the evening was about to be disrupted. The event was nearing its most crucial moment, the charity auction and the keynote address. As Amara sat in her corner, sipping on a glass of water, she overheard snippets of conversation around her. Charlotte was still nearby, speaking loudly about her latest philanthropic endeavors, clearly enjoying the attention that came with being a major donor. Meanwhile, Amara could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. It was time for her to speak, to address the room and remind them of why they were all gathered here in the first place. As the event organizers took the stage to announce the next speaker, Amara rose from her seat, steadying her breath. She could feel the eyes of the room turning toward her, some curious, others skeptical. The faint murmur of surprise rippled through the guests, many of whom had noticed her only as a quiet observer, never as the driving force behind Wild Horizons. The spotlight fell on her as she walked toward the stage, and for a brief moment, Amara hesitated. She could sense the undercurrent of judgment from those who had dismissed her earlier, especially Charlotte, who was now whispering to one of her colleagues. But Amara pushed aside the discomfort, focusing on the greater purpose at hand. She had a responsibility to these animals, to the sanctuary, and to those who would listen. The time had come to set the record straight. "Good evening, everyone." Amara began, her voice steady, resonating through the microphone. "I stand before you tonight not just as a speaker, but as someone who has dedicated her life to the protection of animals on the brink of extinction. I am Amara Johnson, the founder of Wild Horizons, and it's an honor to be here with you all today." There was a brief silence in the room. Charlotte, still seated in her position near the front, looked up with a faint expression of surprise. Her eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the name, though her expression suggested that she still didn't fully understand the significance of what Amara had just said. Amara continued, her words growing more confident with every sentence. "I'm here to tell you the story of Wild Horizons, a sanctuary that has worked tirelessly to protect animals that many people believe are beyond saving. Every animal here, every creature we work to rehabilitate, is a living testament to the strength of those who fight for their survival, and I stand proudly among those fighting for them." The audience remained still, captivated by her words. The room had grown quieter, and more than a few guests were beginning to take notice. Wild Horizons is not just about protecting endangered species. It's about restoring balance to a world that has often turned a blind eye to the devastating effects of climate change, habitat loss, and poaching. Amara said, "Tonight, we are gathered not to just celebrate what we have achieved, but to focus on the work still ahead, the work that needs your support." Her eyes briefly scanned the room, landing on Charlotte for a moment. Charlotte, clearly uncomfortable, shifted in her seat. She had been fully prepared to ignore Amara once again, to dismiss her as a mere background figure in this grand event. But now, Amara's presence on stage was impossible to overlook. "I started this organization with a vision," Amara continued, her voice now unwavering. "A vision to create a space where animals could heal, where they could live in peace, far away from the destructive forces that threaten their existence. But none of this would be possible without the generosity of people like you who believe in the importance of preserving life, even when it feels like there's little hope left." At this moment, Amara could feel the full weight of the room's gaze on her. The whispers from before had stopped. People were listening now, and they were beginning to see Amara for who she truly was. Not just a quiet observer, but the heart and soul of the sanctuary that had brought them all together. Then Amara paused and looked directly at Charlotte. Her expression was calm but resolute. "And to those who may doubt the impact of our work, I invite you to look around and understand that Wild Horizons is not just a dream. It is a living, breathing testament to the power of passion, perseverance, and the belief that no creature is beyond redemption." The guests began to murmur in agreement, and for the first time that evening, Charlotte seemed to shrink in her seat. The realization was hitting her. She had not just underestimated Amara, she had completely misunderstood her. Amara wasn't simply a participant in this event. She was the catalyst for everything that had been achieved and what was yet to come. "Thank you for your support," Amara finished, her voice gentle but firm. "Together we can make a difference. Together we can ensure that these animals have a future." Amara stepped back from the microphone, and the room was filled with a moment of stunned silence before the applause began, tentative at first and then building into something much louder. She had done it. She had shared her truth, and now the room knew. They knew who she was and what she had built, and it was clear that the power of Wild Horizons could no longer be ignored. The moment Amara finished her speech, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The applause that followed was loud and genuine, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Guests who had previously ignored her were now paying attention, some visibly ashamed of their earlier behavior. Yet, amid the applause, Charlotte Sterling remained seated, her face pale and her expression stiff. She knew the damage had already been done. As the evening unfolded, Charlotte began to realize that her actions had exposed something far deeper than just a misunderstanding. She had not only insulted Amara, but she had also insulted the very cause that had brought them all together, the conservation of endangered species. The weight of this realization began to settle heavily on her shoulders. After Amara's speech, the event continued with other presentations and discussions about Wild Horizons projects. But for Charlotte, the sparkle of the evening had dimmed. She couldn't escape the image of Amara on stage, standing tall and confident, while she, Charlotte, had acted out of turn. The uncomfortable whispers she overheard throughout the night only deepened her unease. Charlotte's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The truth was hard to swallow. Amara was not some minor figure, not someone to be dismissed with a condescending glance. Amara was the heart and soul of Wild Horizons, the reason the sanctuary existed in the first place. And yet, just hours ago, Charlotte had belittled her with her careless remarks. Across the room, Amara continued to mingle with the other guests, speaking earnestly about the sanctuary's future plans, sharing her vision for the next phase of growth. She seemed untouched by the previous exchanges, as if the harsh words of Charlotte had not even registered. To Amara, this was about something much bigger than herself. Her focus was solely on the animals and the impact Wild Horizons could make on the world. As Amara spoke to one of the donors about a new wildlife rehabilitation initiative, Charlotte found herself watching her from a distance. There was something almost serene in Amara's presence. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't demanding attention. Yet all eyes were drawn to her. It wasn't because of her clothes or her wealth. It was because she stood for something meaningful. For the first time that evening, Charlotte felt the sting of her own ego. In her world, status and power were everything. She was used to people bending to her will, used to being the one in control. But Amara had shown her that true power came from humility, from purpose, and from the ability to affect change without needing the spotlight. As the night wore on, Charlotte couldn't help but feel more and more out of place. The realization that her words and actions had been rooted in arrogance gnawed at her. There was no apology she could offer that would erase the damage she had done. But there was something else, a moment of clarity. She could either continue down the path of ego and self-interest, or she could learn from this experience and use her position to make a real impact. Meanwhile, Amara remained the picture of grace, never once acknowledging the tension in the room. Her only focus was the mission ensuring that Wild Horizons could continue to provide a safe haven for endangered animals. The sanctuary wasn't just a project. It was a calling, and Amara was the one leading it, with or without recognition. Later in the evening, as the event was winding down, Charlotte approached Amara. She had spent the better part of the evening wrestling with her pride, but something in Amara's quiet strength had made her reconsider her actions. Charlotte knew she had to speak. "Amara," she began, her voice softer than it had been all night. I owe you an apology. I misjudged you and I made a mistake. I acted in a way that was unbecoming. I didn't understand the depth of your work until now." Amara turned to face her, her expression calm but genuine. "There's no need for an apology." "Charlotte," she replied, "what matters is that you've recognized it. The work we're doing isn't about ego. It's about something much bigger. It's about the animals and about making a difference in their lives." Charlotte nodded, feeling the weight of the words sink in. For the first time, she felt small in comparison. Amara wasn't interested in titles, wealth, or the shallow things that people like Charlotte so often use to define themselves. What mattered was what you gave to the world, not what you took. "I understand," Charlotte said quietly, her voice tinged with a hint of remorse. "And I'll do better. I'll do more. Not for the recognition, but for the cause." Amara smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can ask for." The evening drew to a close, but the reverberations of what had happened lingered in the air. Charlotte Sterling could feel the weight of her actions bearing down on her as she sat quietly at her table, her champagne glass untouched. Despite the laughter and chatter around her, there was a palpable sense of discomfort that she couldn't shake off. The recognition that Amara Johnson, the quiet, humble woman she had so carelessly belittled, was the true force behind the event made her feel small. The allure of wealth and status seemed so hollow now, especially when compared to the depth of purpose that Amara exuded effortlessly. As the final speaker wrapped up the evening's presentations, Amara stood at the back of the room, speaking softly with some of the other donors about the next phase of Wild Horizons. She was not interested in basking in applause or seeking validation. She was simply doing what needed to be done. For Amara, The work was the reward. She wasn't in this for recognition. She was in it to make a real, lasting difference for the animals under her care. Charlotte, on the other hand, still felt the sting of her earlier actions. She had tried to laugh off her mistake, but the lesson had settled into her with a quiet but unshakable weight. Her earlier dismissal of Amara as just another staff member felt like a bitter, glaring misjudgment. The truth was undeniable. Now Amara wasn't just a figurehead. She was a leader, a force of nature, and someone whose actions spoke louder than any words ever could. As Charlotte rose from her seat and walked toward Amara, she felt a knot in her stomach. She had not anticipated this encounter, nor had she expected the clarity that had come from hearing Amara's words, seeing her stand tall and unwavering before the crowd. She had expected the usual bravado that came with power, but what Amara had shown her was something far more profound. It was a quiet strength that radiated from within, a strength rooted in conviction and a purpose that was far greater than the desire for personal gain. "Amara," Charlotte began, her voice softer than it had been all evening. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her nerves. I owe you an apology. I misjudged you, and I said things I shouldn't have. I want you to know that I've come to realize just how wrong I was." Amara turned to face her, a gentle but firm look in her eyes. She had expected this moment. Yet, she wasn't interested in gloating. Her goal had always been clear: to protect the animals and give them the future they deserved. Whether Charlotte recognized her role or not, Amara had remained true to her mission. "There's no need for an apology," Amara replied, her tone calm and forgiving. "What matters is that you've learned something tonight. Not just about me, but about the real power behind the work we do. It's not about ego. It's about the animals and about showing up every day, no matter what, to make a difference." Charlotte looked down for a moment, processing Amara's words. There was no trace of bitterness in Amara's voice, only an unwavering sense of purpose. The contrast between their two approaches, Charlotte's focus on personal status versus Amara's dedication to the cause, became even clearer now. It was humbling, and Charlotte felt a pang of guilt, forever thinking that wealth and influence were the ultimate measures of success. "You're right," Charlotte admitted, her voice small but sincere. "I've spent too much of my life chasing things that don't matter, that aren't lasting. But this, what you're doing here, it's different. It's important." Amara nodded, her eyes softening. "We all have a role to play. The question is, what are we going to do with it?" As Charlotte stood there, absorbing Amara's words, she realized that her view of the world was forever changed. It wasn't the wealth or power that truly made a difference. It was how you used your position to affect change. The lives of countless animals depended on the work Amara was doing, and Charlotte knew she had to be a part of it. She couldn't undo her past actions, but she could use her resources moving forward to make a real difference. "I want to help," Charlotte said quietly, her gaze meeting Amara's with newfound determination. "I want to support Wild Horizons, not just as a donor, but as an advocate. I can use my influence for something that matters." Amara smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reflected not just her forgiveness, but her belief in the transformative power of change. "That's all I've ever hoped for." Charlotte learns a valuable lesson about the true power of humility, purpose, and integrity. Amara's quiet strength and unwavering commitment to her cause have shifted Charlotte's perspective. Charlotte now sees that her wealth and influence can be used for something far more meaningful than personal gain. and she commits to supporting Wild Horizons in a way that truly makes a difference. The story ends with a sense of resolution as both women move forward in their respective journeys, one continuing to lead with grace and the other beginning a new path of responsibility and purpose.